Welcome to the Real Freedom Podcast with your host, Ryan Weimer. Today I have Mr. Aaron Cunningham with us. I'm so stoked to talk to a lender and somebody that's been doing this at a high level since 2002, 300 to 400 properties purchased, everything from land development, motels, mobile home parks, fix and flips, rental properties. He's seen it all. So Aaron, I can't wait to really pick your brain on this episode and give a lot of value to the viewers, just given your background and longevity and journey through about every facet in the industry that you can imagine.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us on, and it's been a pleasure to kind of get to know you. I think we've known you just the last couple of years here, watch a little bit about what you've been doing in your business, and it's always kind of fun to see people at kind of different phases and stages, and it seems like you kind of got a running start, and so that's been exciting for us to watch.
Yeah, so for the listeners, Aaron and Landon, we're all connected. They've been one of the hard money lenders that we've used most often with our deals in Boise. So they're out of Spokane and do quite a few loans, and I'm sure we'll get into that, Aaron. We'd like to start off this podcast, though, with everybody's most beautiful failure. So, what's your most beautiful failure, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a couple that kind of come to mind, and I think I shot you some information about both of those. But I think probably the first one that comes to mind where I would say it was a beautiful failure actually doesn't relate to a property, it relates to a person. And of course, I'm not going to use people's names, but when we were kind of getting Inland Capital up and going for the first probably 6 or 7 years that we were lending, it was just myself and the other founder of the company that were doing all of our sales. We were doing kind of bootstrap marketing. Back then you could market on Craigslist, believe it or not, and we market on Craigslist and get deals and different things like that. But so as we're kind of growing, we realized one of the first components that we're going to need besides administrative help is we were going to need sales help, and ended up knowing a guy from some kind of personal relationships and brought him onto the company. And really, I think where things kind of get interesting is we work together, and for us, we're the type of people that if you work with us, you're kind of like family. And so we ended up really befriending this guy. We're spending time over holidays together. I think we spent Thanksgiving. We spend time, on weekends and on boats and at lakes and different things like this. And so had really poured into this person as an individual, not with this idea that we're trying to make money off of somebody, but I think this idea of mentorship on a one-to-one basis where you're pouring your life into somebody. For me, that's what somebody did for me when I was younger. And so I kind of took this approach with this person, and it wasn't something I had to try to do. It was something that was really natural. And we kind of get down the road a little bit. I think it was 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years, the guy had been working for us, and we had paid out Christmas bonuses. And the day after the last Christmas bonus goes out, he comes into my office and he says, "Hey, I just want you to know that I'm leaving the company and I'm going to work for one of your biggest competitors." And it was one of those where it was like a gut punch. That's what I would say. It was like one of these things where it didn't necessarily matter to me that somebody wasn't going to work with me forever. It was more on this idea of like there was a loss of relationship that happened. And part of this kind of goes back if we say, what are the lessons? And so we had been friends. We had spent time together as families with wives and kids. Landon had spent time with this person, and he leaves, and then he goes to work for one of my competitors, happened to have perhaps downloaded a client list on the way out the door, and it kind of created this conflict for us. And I think as we kind of look back on it, now it's been 5 or 6 years since that happened. The lesson that I'll say that we learn is that you can't really trust everybody. But I think on the other side of it, we've kind of reconciled the relationship to some extent. And what we've seen is somebody who's gone out, taken a lot of the principles, obviously, that we had built in and that we had developed. His downloading the client list, we were kind of able to reconcile that. And he's gone out and been successful outside of my client list. And it was something that, so on this one side, we go, yeah, there was this pain of this relationship that was kind of broken. But there's this other benefit of knowing that we were able to develop something in somebody that, like, long term, I think will be beneficial for him. I think it's beneficial for us to go through those things and realize, hey, we're not going to always have the people that we think that we can rely on. And sometimes you have to be able to say, like, can I be independent of this person? Can I be independent of this situation? And can we still thrive? and you question those things while you're in the middle of it. But I would say that was probably one of the most powerful learning lessons for us, or me individually in my business, and then figuring out what I would say, and this is kind of weird because I don't know that people talk about this kind of stuff a lot in real estate, to say, how do you get through this? How do you not harbor a grudge? How do you realize like everybody makes decisions for certain reasons, and even though we don't necessarily agree with those decisions, that it's not always about me, it's not always against me. And then how do I learn to forgive in those processes?
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow. Well, thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that with us because I've had a similar situation like that. Not somebody that I've been on, vacations with and that was close with my family, but how long did that individual work with you guys? How many years?
I think it was about 3 years.
Wow. And the reasoning to go to a competitor was,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I ever really got down to the bottom of that. I think that there's always we're not the largest hard money lender, and our goal isn't really to be the largest. Our goal is to be the best in this kind of niche segment that we operate in. So we're not nationwide. We're somewhat choosy about the way we do loans, meaning we're not here to just put money out in the market. We're actually here to see our clients succeed, which means we have to turn some loans down because not everybody that brings something they think is a deal do we consider a deal. And so when we look at deals, it's really about both parties winning and us having like a 98% confidence that we're both going to come out of this deal ahead. And so what that means is that if you're working in a sales position here, you might get more no's than you do yeses, but the yeses that we are able to give end up being a lot of repeat yeses. And so I think that there's always this idea of, I know I could go somewhere else and I could probably do a lot more deals, if that makes sense, because maybe the restrictions and the underwriting aren't quite as rigid. Maybe it's a massive hedge fund that's operating this lending facility. So I think that honestly, it was probably about more volume. And look, I don't blame somebody for that idea of like, hey, I want more volume, because we're a little bit more on this conservative side, and we're more about 10 years out than 2 months out. And what's kind of interesting is about the company that he went to work for, and I won't mention that name either, but it was about 4 years into it that they declared bankruptcy and went out of business.
yeah. So there's a reason why. I mean,
Yeah,
the,
I mean,
the,
and
the grass
let
is
me
not
let
always
me
greener.
yeah, and let me reverse that a little bit. I don't know that they declare bankruptcy. I know they're out of business. And yeah, and I don't know. I mean, for some people, right, and everybody has different business objectives. And I would say it depends on what you consider green grass to be. Is it that long term nutrition, or is it something that just fills you up, right? And so I think different people kind of have different perspectives. And if the goal is just to get as much as you can right away, there are different ways that people finance investors. There are different ways that real estate investors invest, right? And so I think for us, like I said, our goal is kind of always this long-term thinking, whether it's the investors that invest into our funds or the type of borrowers that we work with. We want to establish these long, slow relationships with people. And that doesn't mean we're a slow process as far as how we lend, but we're just not snapping up every loan that we can possibly get, because really our goal is thinking, is what this borrower is doing sustainable? Will it work time and again? And it doesn't mean that we won't deal with a one-time borrower, but the idea is sustainability behind the business, not just putting money out into the market.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's difficult as a business owner. I mean, hiring, let alone somebody that you know, like, and trust,
Mm,
is such a challenge. I can tell you initially when I was naive, I got into this and I had a few, they weren't partners, but they were employees that nothing was ever good enough. And
mm,
after a couple of them left to go be my competition, I don't believe in signing a non-compete. I was totally
mm,
against that because I was all abundance mindset. I want people to learn and grow. And if they go off and do their own thing, they go off and do their own thing. But that was before I saw what training my competition looked like. And it happened a couple times.
yeah.
And it was like, hey, for the longevity of the business and for our time, we started putting a non compete into every offer because of that. And especially
Yeah,
with the nuances of real estate, too, the amount
sure.
of time, effort, and energy you have to pour in to train people on the nuances of the type of asset and how to underwrite it and all that. There's so many moving pieces every day, and every deal is different. And I think that
Yeah,
creates a bigger training burden on the manager
yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, 100% I agree with you. And I think that could be whether like kind of any different kind of component in your business where something that you have is proprietary. I think a lot of people potentially think of this idea of I'm taking a job somewhere, I can take this knowledge, I can go somewhere else. I think what we've realized over time is that sometimes to get somebody trained, operating, and making you money, that takes a lot, right? And so sometimes
Oh
that's a
yeah.
year or 2 years. So we're literally like we're pouring into somebody, and the idea is that we want long-term relationships. I never want to be the type of person that restricts someone's ability in the future. Like, we're not in a slave ownership society, but at the same time, I think there's this idea that, like, I've spent 20 years doing this. If I'm hiring somebody and I have a team of people and we have a lot of long-term experience in this business, we're putting a lot in time, energy, and money. We're providing something for them. And the goal of any investment is to see some kind of a return on that investment. So I think it's different. And I really think that one thing I would think of, both from the side of a business owner and then the side of somebody coming to work for a business, is saying the goal is long term. Like, I want to see you on the street in 10 years from now and like you, right?
Right.
Like, money kind of comes, I think, a lot of times as a result of how you treat people. And if you treat people well and you don't worry so much about how much you're going to get out of it, a lot of times what you get out of it is a lot greater. Maybe not a lot greater like financially, but sometimes it is financial. But you get a lot more reward, these intangibles of relationships. Like, can you walk around your town? And like, Spokane's a small town. I don't know how Boise feels compared to Spokane. I've spent a little bit of time there, but like, we don't go downtown for dinner on a Friday night and not see someone we know. We always
Right.
see somebody we know. So the question is like, can you go downtown and not worry about seeing somebody that you burned or that you don't like, right? There's a real value in that. And so coming into a job, I think this idea would be is like, you want that, right? And there's sometimes like the guy that hires you is a loser and you got to get out, right? And there's sometimes you hire somebody that's a loser and you got to let them go, or it's just not working. You're just not feeling like this is going to be. But the idea of business in towns like this, where I think it's different when you get into those bigger towns, you get into a town like Seattle, you may never see that person again, right? You get into a town like Spokane, you're going to see that person again. And so I think the
Yeah.
idea is like, when you see people, can you feel good about the way that you've treated them, even if you've had exits or different things like that?
Yeah, I think that is such a good point. I think that really sets up when you do that as a business owner and you're playing the long game, it really sets you up for long term success and viability. You got to think that starting in a small town actually helps with that because it
Yeah,
keeps you always thinking about the long term, always, because your reputation can be gone like that. So
it
uh,
really
I,
can. Yes.
I definitely resonate with that. I want to talk a little bit about you got into real estate in 2002. So you went
Mhm.
through the big crash in 08, 09.
Yeah.
Kind of talk me through that journey of what you were doing when you got started and then how you
Yeah.
handled the crash.
So 2001, 2002, I was selling real estate. I was in Seattle at the time. That's where my wife and I met, and that's where we were intending to stay. And so I was working in real estate, figured out how to start buying and selling foreclosure properties. So we were actually going down to the courthouse. We were doing our own research at the time. There weren't companies that were providing data online. We were getting spreadsheets from the Journal of Business, and then we were doing all of our own title research, and then we were going down. And so ended up spending about 6 months kind of researching how to buy a property at the auction, watching properties go, and then ended up with our first property. And then from there started to be companies that were putting the data out for us so that they were tracking all the foreclosure data and everything like that. So we utilized a company out of Seattle that was doing that. And originally we were all cash because there were like hard money lending back at that time was not necessarily investor focused. There were hard money lenders, but they were more like the type of people that would take advantage of your grandma, right? And so there was a hard money lender that kind of showed up on the scenes. It happened to be the same guys that owned the auction business. They were providing capital at the auction. So we'd have to put 25% down. They provide 75% of the capital. And it was expensive. Like, I remember our first loans were like 5 points and 15% in the early 2000s. And like, I think everybody like laughs at that now. I still figured out how to make business work. I went from buying one house to buying like 15 houses, and yeah, it was really expensive, but there is a value to, kind of being able to scale. And so we were able to scale utilizing this hard money lender and their data. And we started buying a lot of properties in Seattle, say 2003, 2004, 2005. And from there, I think it was about 2006. Now, we had seen just this giant rise in the market, and it had gone from this point. If I want like people to take like one idea of real estate investing from me, this is the idea that I would say you should take. You always have to buy it for less than it's worth. That's it. It's the most simple strategy in the world when it comes to real estate is you always buy something for less than it's worth. And so my model is like, I never want to pay more than 75% of market value for something. And I want to kind of come back to that because I think there's a good point. But taking this idea of you always buy something for less than it's worth, what was happening from 2005 to 2004, 2005, 2006 is our margins, went from here and they kept getting squeezed over time. And all of a sudden, we're seeing people buying stuff for 85 and 90% of market value at the auction. And what was happening is, let's just use a value that we would be dealing with back in 2008. The house is worth $300,000 today when I'm buying it at the auction. But when I go sell it in 4 months, it's going to be worth $330,000. So everybody starts banking on this idea that appreciation will happen. And I don't disagree with appreciation happening. I just don't know that we can always bank on this rapid appreciation. And generally speaking, if you see rapid appreciation, you're likely to see rapid depreciation right after that, right? I was not raised with money. I was not raised in a family that did real estate. This was just like this simple, like my dad made $30,000 a year, right? So I have this strategy of like, I can never call my parents and ask for money, right? Like this fear of failure was great in my eyes, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
we're going down and all of a sudden we're seeing people spending 85 and 90% of market value for these properties. And I'm going, I can't buy anything. So occasionally something would slip through the cracks and we would buy it. And what happened was is we started, my wife's family is from Spokane. Her family had homesteaded in the 1800s, like north of Spokane, and they own a ranch up there. And so we would come over a couple of times a year. So I came over and I actually went down to the auction in Spokane, and I'm like, oh man, houses are cheap here. And I could actually buy a house. So before the crash, I don't think people like comprehend this today. Before the crash, like it was super common, before the crash of 2008, it was super common for people to buy a rental and plan to negative cash flow on it because they were banking on this appreciation over 2 and 3 and 5 years. So like everybody is negative cash flowing on rentals. I don't know, 10 rentals, something like that in that kind of Seattle area at that time, but I would not negative cash flow. I'm like, because I'm looking at it and I'm going, I'm going to be writing checks for this thing. And I don't know
Yeah.
how many checks I can write. And if things slow down, like what's going to happen to me? So I come over to Spokane. I realize I can be buying properties straight off the market and cash flowing them if I'm putting 20% down. Okay. So then I go to the auctions and people are spending something like 75% of market value versus in Seattle, they're spending 85 or 90% of market value. So I look at it, I'm like, this is a good opportunity. So Karen and I, that's my wife. I just said, hey, what do you think about moving to Spokane? She loved the idea. And so that's kind of how we ended up here. I'm blanking out on what your original question was because I
Well,
start
no, I,
rattling.
I I think that's super relevant of knowing when to pivot or
Yeah.
know when to hold them, know when to fold them. So
Yeah.
did you move in '06? Were you already seeing the crash before you
Yeah.
moved or
So I would love to tell you, I have this thing and I put my hat on and I can see, something, that's going to happen in the future. What I realized is that I couldn't comfortably buy houses and know that I was going to make money on them because everybody was paying far too close to market value for the houses. So I looked at Spokane and I'm like, we can go to Spokane and we can buy houses discounted like we were doing in Seattle 4 years ago. So that was kind of what inspired the move from Seattle to Spokane. Plus, we have 4 seasons in Spokane, and Seattle has maybe 2 seasons. Like Seattle's great; it's beautifully green. I love going back there. But this kind of idea of being in a place with 4 seasons, knowing that it wasn't kind of such a rat race in the real estate market. There was still more kind of pessimism in the real estate market here than there was in Seattle. So we moved here in 2006, and then we actually ended up starting like an auction services company. So we were helping people buy the properties at the auction. And then in 2008, we were calculating, kind of our hard money costs. And we sold some stuff when we moved from Seattle to Spokane. And we realized if we start small, we can start lending money in Spokane. So we started lending money in Spokane in 2008. Meanwhile, we're always buying, we're always buying, we're always selling. What I'll say is like the lending business has been a really good business for us. I think it's a really good business for us because we understand real estate investing. And when I look at loans, I think this is an important kind of factor for a real estate, say flipper or a guy who's building a portfolio to consider is when I look at loans, I look at it from the perspective of a real estate investor. Okay. So if I'm going to lend Ryan Weimer money, I'm going to say, if everything doesn't work out for Ryan, I'm going to own this real estate. How's that going to work out for me? So I look at in every deal that we do, so every loan that we underwrite today, I look at every single loan, I look at every single property, I look at all the pictures, I look at all the comps, I look at the experience of the borrower, and really it's still that exact same mentality that I will tell you that I started with is I have to pay less for it today than it's worth. And we kind of go back on our history and things like that in a second and talk about some different types of properties and even some mistakes we've made along that kind of path. But one of the things I think that's really important is I think if somebody's kind of new and they're getting into the flipping business, or I'm going to be a real estate investor, sometimes they're more anxious about the idea of becoming an investor than wisely investing. And what I'll say is like, you can learn, right? And you can learn by losing money because you're really anxious. But the chances of you wanting to stay in the business and repeating what you're doing, if you lose money, go down significantly. They go up significantly if you make money. Now, there's also markets that are really easy to make money in, meaning when the market's doing really well, everybody makes money. And I think that like we kind of equate that to our genius sometimes. We're like, well, look, I know what I'm doing. No, perhaps you know what you're doing, and perhaps you're just in a really good market. But the only way that you can be sure that you're always a winner is to always pay less than your property's worth. Okay. And the way I think about that is like, I like simple math, like 2 and 2 equals 4, right? And I think some people, when they get into this, they like art, not math. So they start like trying to like draw things and figure out how to structure a deal and make something work. And they draw this beautiful picture, but the economics are really terrible. The math matters first. And then if your math matters, then go ahead and be an artist. I'm not an artist. I'm a math guy. And all I'm trying to do is make sure that my numbers add up. And on every single deal, if I'm not sure that my numbers add up, then I don't do the deal. If you get really good at it, you can start to figure out, like you could send me a property like today in Boise, as an example, as long as it's not a crazy complicated property. And I could tell you what I would pay for that property inside of 15 minutes with some real simple data, right? And I don't have to do anything special. I don't have to do any special figuring or anything like that. It's just real simple math.
Yeah, no, I think that is using that frame of being a real estate investor and putting it through a simple frame really takes all the emotion out of it. You're really
Mm-hmm.
just looking at, does this make sense on paper? And I like what you said about the artists. And I see so many people that get into flipping because they're obsessed with like interior design and the feeling that it brings them to see something
Mm.
that looks like crap to something that looks really nice. If you operate like that, you probably shouldn't be a business owner. You should go.
Or be an interior designer.
Right, exactly. But you cannot make investing decisions based on your creative side of your brain. You have to use your logic side. Now, there's applications for the creative side and innovation and all that stuff, but brass tacks of numbers to simplify it down is you just have to understand what's profitable and what's not. And you can't let
Yeah.
your emotions get ahead of yourselves. And I feel like people are on one end of the spectrum when they're first getting started. They're in analysis paralysis. And even when they have a good deal that comes across their way or they find a good deal, they are too scared to pull the trigger. Or these people that get anxious and they're like, I just need to do a deal. It's been 6 months. It's been a year. I haven't done a deal. I need to do a deal, need to do a deal. And then they just sabotage themselves by doing a crappy deal because they want to feel the emotion of doing a deal and being an
Yeah.
investor, even though what is the point of being an investor if you're not making money?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the idea of there's a lot of really great hobbies, right? You could go skiing, like you can play golf, you can read books, you can spend time with your kids. Like all of those are great hobbies that are significantly less expensive than a real estate hobby that doesn't pencil. And I don't know, we see restaurants open and close like within 6 months. We see so many different businesses that kind of have these. And I've even watched real estate investors that I've tried to coach who get in a hurry and then they lose money. And then I think that there's this thing where I'm not the guy who will stop you from doing something. Like if, I might not fund your deal, but I can't stop you from buying a bad deal, right?
Right.
And then, but they'll buy this deal and then they'll come back and they'll be like, oh man, you were right. And then they'll get antsy again and go repeat the process, right? I remember it was like it was probably 6, 7 years ago. I was one of my business partners. We owned a real estate brokerage also. One of my business partners was thinking about doing some investing and he brings me this property and I looked and he's like, I can pay X for it and I can sell it for Y. And so I run it through my spreadsheet. He's going to borrow money from us. And so I run it through my spreadsheet and I said, hey, pull them into my office. And we pulled the spreadsheet up and I said, hey, I'm looking at the numbers and based on what you're paying, based on what you're saying you're going to fix it up for, you're breaking even. Now, most of the time, I think that for guys who are experienced, we understand if you think you're going to spend $15,000 fixing up your property, or you think you're going to spend 30,000, just like add 25%. Like
A
it's
hundred
just
percent.
really
Yeah.
rare. And it's not because like we're being fancy. It's because you're like, oh, I found mold in the basement. Oh, I didn't realize that they ran knob and tube wiring into brand new wiring and I got to fix that. There's little things that happen. Like, so we need a contingency in our budget. So anyways, I talked to my buddy about this and I run him through the numbers and I say, hey, and he's like, maybe a little bit emotional about the deal. We're still great friends. We're still business partners on that business. And hey, Aaron, like, what should I do? I said, you should go back and get that price down like another $15,000. Create a little bit of margin for yourself. And this was before the market was really spiking. It was fairly flat at the time. And so, anyways, he goes back and he negotiated down $5,000. And so he's like, hey, will you fund it for me? And I know the guy, I've known him for a long time. I said, okay, we'll fund it for you. So we fund the deal, and his profit margin on that deal was $5,000. And he never flipped a house again,
Yeah.
right? Because he could sell real estate and he can make $15,000 or $20,000 a pop. $5,000 on a flip's not that great. And I don't think it's really hard to find properties to buy and sell. But it's interesting that we would think that we can walk into a business and we can start that business in 1 month. Like we can
Right.
find our first deal. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you can find a deal inside of a month. But I would say like, if you're just thinking about getting going, like educate yourself. And so, well, let's see, I'm 21, 22 years into the business. I have searches every day that show up from real estate brokers in 6 different counties. And I look at hundreds of properties in those counties every day based on certain metrics. And so when a property comes along that's a deal, I'm like, oh, I just saw something just like this in this exact town and it was $55,000 higher. This could be a deal. Or I saw a duplex and it was worth $850,000 and now I'm looking at a motel that's got 20 rooms and it's $1,000,001. Dang, I think I might be able to make that work, right? But that's years of looking, and I don't think it takes years. I just think it takes looking at hundreds of properties. Look at bedrooms, look at bathrooms, look at garages, understand the difference in the value of a split level and a rancher style home. Don't be in a hurry. It's something you can just spend 45 minutes a day or an hour a day on. But it's called education, right? And I think there's this idea that we can walk into real estate with zero education and we can make money. And we watch TV and we see fake numbers with fake profit margins and we think, oh gosh, that's got to be so easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it
Right.
and everybody would be getting super rich off of it. And yet you don't know a lot of people. I will guarantee you that like we don't know a lot of people that are really rich from flipping real estate. We know a lot of people who started flipping real estate and then they started figuring out other mechanisms that they could do within real estate to generate wealth. But flipping real estate, I would say it's I still flip real estate. I probably do 3 to 5 deals a year. I used to do like 35 or 40 deals a year. flipping real estate is income, just like selling real estate is income. Income's fine. I got no problem with it. But the guys who really know what they're doing in real estate, they're buying real estate and they're holding it long term. They're getting depreciation benefits, they're getting incentives for opportunity zones, they're doing they have tax mitigation strategies and all kinds of different things like that. And so look, it's a flipping real estate is a great mechanism to get going, right? But it's really not a great mechanism to build wealth. And if you're going to do it, what you've got to realize is that as you're getting into it, you're going to pay, whatever your tax rate is based on your earnings. You're going to be putting that money. That money is going to the government every year, right? I'm not opposed to paying taxes. I think there's some necessity in it. I don't think anybody really loves paying taxes, but the idea is then as what if you could like flip two houses and keep one rental? All of a sudden you
Yep.
can start to offset some of these income issues. And now I've got rentals that like I paid too much for in like 2008 and 2009, and I have them paid off because I've owned them for that long. And so now I've got these chunks of cash sitting in different properties that I can trade at some point and do 1031 exchanges. So that's tax deferred exchange. So you don't pay any tax when you sell this property and go into the next one. I've got like college funds set up for my kids if I want to sell one of those houses and pay for my kids to go to college, or they're generating rent. I could pay for college with the rent that's coming in. But that takes like years to kind of develop that. And so I think this idea of if we're going into real estate, it's really valuable to not jump the gun, because if you jump the gun, you do a couple bad deals and you quit, you're never going to get to this point where you have all these other options down the road.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm curious, in '08, what made you want to pivot to lending? Did you see the writing on the wall in the market? Was it kind of just the right time? You had sold some stuff in Seattle, moving to Spokane. You're like a fresh start looking for something new. How did you get into lending at that time?
Yeah, so in 2008, I think like in the worst part of the market, like the sky is falling, everything's going to hell in the handbasket. I think I had like 8 properties, that were in process at this time. Now, going back to my strategy, I had paid less for all of them than they were worth. So I had equity in all these properties, and we were able to kind of discount some prices. Maybe on some of them we didn't make any money or whatever. By this time I'd done, say 150 properties or something in that range. So I'm like, okay, well, every once in a while you're going to have a loser. Every once in a while the time frame's not going to be great if I'm doing these situations. So I think kind of it had been a conversation since early on when we were borrowing money when it was 5 points and 15%. Hey, that could be a good business down the road. And in 2008, we just found ourselves in a position of going, we had some cash. Maybe we can start to do this. And for me, was another mechanism that could be an income generator that wasn't outside the box of what I already knew. So, like,
Right.
I already understand real estate, right? Now, I've got to figure out, the legal ramifications. I've got to figure out what kind of documents we've needed and all these kind of things. And this is just another piece of advice that I would offer, like anybody, as you're kind of getting going, is don't go way outside the box of what you already know. So everything I do today is under the umbrella of real estate. I may like invest in a startup company that a friend of mine has told me about that's a really good business, but that's never going to be a major investment for me because I don't know it. Like I don't know technology. I tried to start a technology company like 7 years ago, like a real estate technology company. Maybe that should have been my biggest failure because it was a zoo. And I'm trying to tell a programmer how to do his job. I don't know anything. I
Yep.
know math. Like I don't know how to do So it was within the realm of what we already knew. I already had a client base built in because we're helping people buy these properties at these foreclosure sales. And then at this point, we've got short sales. We've got a bunch of REO. I mean, like the REO list were like 100 properties a day. I don't remember the last time I saw something come through as an REO on like like through the MLS, right? But we had so many REO. So I had this client base already who was already borrowing money from a hard money lender. And here was kind of our strategy in starting that hard money lending company is we called our friends that we had been borrowing money from in Seattle at that time. And we said, hey, we're thinking about getting going. and we would like to start a hard money lending company. And they actually helped us because, and this
Cool.
is one thing I would say, like somebody like you, I don't know all the specifics of everything that you're into, but if somebody were to call you and they were to say, hey, would you kind of help me out here a little bit? Like a lot of people are really just happy to like share the knowledge. Like you realize probably along with me that there's a lot of fish in the sea. There's a lot of business to be done. I'm not going to do it exactly like you do. So these guys were super gracious in, kind of leading us through the ropes. They would sell us some of their loans on occasion and different things like that. And we had this built-in pool already. And then, kind of our strategy with lending kind of since then has been, we've been very committed to like reinvesting our earnings back into the company and then continuing to look for a specific type of borrower. And that specific type of borrower is the type of person that we think will be in the game in 3, 5, and 10 years from now.
So I'm curious in '08 when you're getting into lending, are you thinking, hey, there's a high likelihood at this time that we may have to repossess these, and so that's why I want to become a lender? Was there some of that of worst case
Yeah.
scenario? I'm probably lending at, I don't know what you were lending at then, but it had to be a pretty conservative
Yeah.
LTV.
Yeah, and our LTV actually since 2008 in our portfolio has not changed very much.
Wow.
Like really, I kind of have to back up a little bit and go, okay, let's just go back to that I have to buy it for less than it's worth kind of strategy, right? If you buy something for less than it's worth, your options are greater. Okay. So if I buy a house for, let's just say I buy a house for 250 and it's worth 400. Okay. I've got some options. Like I can fix it up and I can sell it. My chances of cash flowing on it are greater. Then we could probably think of like 6 or 7 other options, right? So the idea behind lending was that we knew we could provide a service, we knew we had the capital available, and we knew that in the case of default, meaning somebody doesn't make their payments, that yeah, we can take that property back. By the way, we've done hundreds of these things. No big deal for us to fix a house up and sell it. No big deal for us to take a piece of land and finish the development, or an apartment building and finish some units out and go do that. However, what I will say is I'm very kind of specific in my businesses. So my real estate business is for the purpose, meaning buying and selling or holding properties. That's what that business is for. My lending business is for lending, not owning. Okay.
Right.
And now, worst case scenario, because I'm into things for less than they're worth, even on our loans, I can take that property back and reposition it. But I didn't like the idea of mixing those businesses and then I don't like the idea of being predatory, if that makes sense. So I don't want to do a loan for you because I like your property, but I think you're not going to perform, with the idea that like I'm going to do everything I can to get your property from you. My idea is that's its own standalone entity. And I've got borrowers that I've worked with since 2008 that I'm still working with today. Right. So the idea is, yeah, worst case scenario, I have recovery potential. And, that's the great thing about being less than something's worth in any business is your recovery potential is much better.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Well,
mean it always works, but it can.
so, all that being said, the thing that I love about real estate the most is this concept that you can legally insider trade, right? You
Mm.
can knowingly, day one, when you buy something, you can know with 100% certainty that you've made money. And I'm curious, why in the world would anyone ever buy stocks or get into the stock market if you can't legally insider trade?
Well, you're asking the wrong person. I think like a fraction of 1% of my capital is tied up in the stock market. And mainly that because we have a retirement plan and I have to contribute to it. So, and I probably could have been a little bit more strategic and figured out some of that in real estate. Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of things about like the stock market, and I'm not a mass leverage guy or any of those kind of things, but you also have zero ability to leverage in the stock market unless you're taking a mass amount of risk, right? And so the idea of being able to leverage in real estate is one of the beauties of it. You can go in, with $20,000 and buy $100,000 property, and your appreciation or depreciation is going to be based on that $100,000. So if your market's, gaining simple numbers at 10% a year and you got $20,000 in this property, you're making 50% a year. That's ridiculous. And you can be depreciating that property while you own it. which means you're creating more tax benefit for yourself. And then when you have that thing paid off, you can trade it with, or even before you have that thing paid off, you can trade it with zero tax implication, assuming you do a 1031 exchange or a reverse 1031 exchange. I think the reason people would do is, I wrestle with this because we have these funds that allow people to invest money with us too, right? And they're investing in our loan portfolio or some real estate type stuff. I wrestle with this conversation with people. So one, you have your traditional financial advisors, and your traditional financial advisors don't get paid when they don't have your money. So if they're
Yep.
not getting paid when they don't have your money, they don't want your money to be anywhere other than themselves. Now, not all of them are that selfish. Like, we've developed some relationships with some that have actually, been able to say, hey, like, this client doesn't want to put any more money in the market. Meet my friend Aaron or meet my friend Landon. But so real estate's outside of the traditional norm for how people think of investing, and they think it's complicated, right? I have friends that own one or two rentals, and they're stressed out about those rentals. Like, well, what if the guy leaves and then I'm in charge of that $1,700 a month payment? And I'm like, yeah, well, you're making money like at year over year, and what if he trashes my house? And I'm like, yeah, that's a potential, that someone will trash you. It's not for the faint of heart. Yet at the same time, I would say I'm 43, so I'm like, if to my friends, I would say, hey, if you started doing this when you were 21, that wouldn't be your concern anymore. The problem is that you're 42 and you're starting this now, and you're feeling the stress I was feeling when I was 22 years old. And so I think that, and then look, if you want a job where you go check in and then you go check out, and you have your weekends and you have your evenings and you have your holidays, real estate's not the business for you. Okay. It can become the business for you. I'm not working a lot of nights, weekends, and holidays, but I kind of still am. Like, there's a chance I'll get like a call and be like, hey, there's a fire. Or, we have 7 homeless people, sleeping under the canopy at this. Or a car, we have this one building and cars run into it like twice a year, and you're like, oh, a car ran into the building again. But if this is the problem with, I mean, we could get into some really deep stuff with like my perspective on the way we educate people on what they should expect of life, right? And so you have people that go to school, they figure out how to pass a test, they go to college, they pass tests, they never read a book again. They want to check in and check out. That's not how most of society has ever worked throughout the entire history of the world. You go back to agrarian society, you had to pay attention to what was going on outside. You had to pay attention to weather patterns. You had to think about the fact that when it's freezing and you have a pond out there and it's calving season, I think I mentioned something like this. Your cow might drop its calf into a river and that calf might drown. You can't not pay attention. For most of history, for most societies, people have had to pay attention to things, and we're really comfortable. We're really comfortable in America. And so the idea is, I check in, I check out, I put a little bit of money in my savings account, I put a little bit of money in my retirement account, and I don't think about it. And if I do that, my dad did it. My dad worked at Boeing. My dad didn't, but my dad worked at Boeing, and he ended up with $1.5 million. And when he retired in 1983, he lived comfortably for the rest of his life. I think that's the problem is that for a certain period of time, we had like 60 years in American history where you could kind of do this, where you just and we had great stock market years. The stock market was still kind of newer. And if you just had this long-term investment strategy, you could do it. But their ability to gain like real wealth doesn't necessarily come from the stock market. I think it's like something in the high 90s, like high 90% of millionaires in our country come from real estate.
Yeah.
They don't come from starting their own business, a tech business, which is like, if you can do it and you can be successful, like, that's beautiful. They don't do it from the stock market. They actually did it through real estate. So I think that like real estate is just a much better strategy as far as the longevity, but you do have to have a stomach for it. You do have to know that you're going to get a call in the middle of the night sometimes. Some things are going to happen. And then what you have to decide is, I had to do this at a certain point. I remember is I had to be, I can check out. I don't have to be there. I don't have to pay attention. If I don't, I've done this one time in my 23 years. If I don't turn my phone on for 9 days, the world will survive. And
Yeah.
surprisingly, it totally freaking did. So I think if you start overthinking things and you become like almost like psychotic in your thinking and you got to control every little thing, you got to stop that and you got to just know that like some things are going to be okay. Doesn't mean I don't pay attention. I'm still checking emails at 5:30 in the morning. I usually try to be done checking emails by about 8 o'clock at night, but it doesn't really stress me out. Some of it is I know that if I get an important email, I can deal with it, or if it's not important, I can flag it until tomorrow. But you have to be able to time manage. Why people don't invest in real estate versus the stock market, I think it's just they don't know and they think it's really hard.
Yeah.
But I know some really dumb real estate investors who are really rich.
Yeah. So do I. Absolutely. So I'm curious, I want to get your take as a lender on the sub two market and taking over loans subject to. Do you see, I don't know if you've purchased any of those, do you see any risk in more of those banks calling those notes due or finding out or hiring somebody to go see if the person on the loan is actually the owner of the property, these types of things, and just get your take on all that?
Yeah, so I don't have any statistics on that. It makes some up. But I think so. I've never been a big subject to guy. I mean, and that's not new. That's been going on as long as I've been in the business. In the 80s, it was beautiful because you could actually get assignments of loans, a loan assigned to you. So now you have to buy them subject to, and then you kind of hope that the bank doesn't, call that note, right? Everything's risk reward. If you're getting a really good deal, and you know that you'll be able to like take out that loan, if that loan gets called, because we still have to foreclose on it like normal. So you buy a property subject to that's got my name on it, and I just, sign the property over to you. Bank finds out about it and they want to take that. They're like, hey, pay the loan off or we're going to foreclose. They start foreclosing. Weirdly enough, in this situation, if you bought the property from me, it's my credit that's getting screwed, not
Yep.
yours. I think we have to question the ethics of that like a little bit because, I would never want to do that to somebody where I'm like, well, screw it. Like, I'm going to take as long as I can and I'm going to, whatever, because then now you're putting my family in jeopardy through my credit. And you can say, well, Aaron, you knew. And I can say, yeah, I did. However, I don't know that a lot of the people that are signing subject twos really know what they're signing. And they really know if somebody defaults, they're going to find themselves in trouble.
I,
That just feels like just a touch dirty.
yeah. I'll tell you, most people that end up wanting to do creative finance deals, it's because they're thinking about today,
Yeah.
right? So, like, they're
Yeah.
thinking about how can I get the highest price, even if that price takes me 50 years to get paid out? Or
Yeah.
how can I get money tomorrow because I have these,
Yeah.
I'm in credit card debt or whatever. And so there's always
Yeah.
this short-term driver that,
Yeah.
that they don't care or they're incapable of seeing past
Yeah.
today or tomorrow.
And I think you have that both on the buyer side and the seller side,
Right.
right? And I look at it. I had a buddy call me the other day. This is one of my friends. He's got a rental house, and he had someone else call him, and he said, "Hey, I want to buy your house, but I want to wait till rates come down. So can I do like a subject to or something like this?" This is legitimately like a week ago. My buddy calls me about this, and he's like, "Aaron, what would you do?" And I was like, I wouldn't do it. I was like, it seems like this guy is trying to get a better deal than the market, and he doesn't want to pay a standard rate. And the question is he going to pay like a big, if he's going to pay you a big premium for your home, then I would consider something like a lease option or something like that, which lease options in Washington are really complicated. And you probably, Idaho, everything's better in Idaho. So you probably,
Yeah.
but I just think generally speaking, in my history of even people that want to do lease options is the only reason they're lease optioning your house is because they can't buy it right now and they want to lock in price today, And so generally speaking, I can understand why people would do them. It probably wouldn't be something that I would really try hard to jump into. Yeah, at the same time, let's just say my buddy called me and he's like, "Hey, Aaron, I'd love to just get out of this house. I'll let you just take the title to it. My rate's at 3%. I can feel comfortable doing that because I'm reasonably confident that I can write a check or I can call my banker and I can get a loan and I can get that thing paid off if anything ever. But if we're doing it as an investment strategy and you don't have the ability to pay that loan out, like you're not really, really certain, I just don't know that it's best for both parties. And I think my wife's uncle who died, he was a rancher. He died like 10 years ago. One of his statements that he would make is he says, a deal is a good deal if it's good for both parties.
Yep.
If a deal is only good for one party, it's not a really good deal. And Like I'm a real estate guy. Like I like deals, right? So I'm not saying you can't go out and buy deals, but what I am saying is if that deal comes with like a little bit of sneakiness, if it comes with a little bit of unethical activity, if it comes with potentially having to do something wrong or convincing somebody that their house isn't worth what it's worth or any of those things, I'm not particularly interested in it. I know it happens all the time, right? I don't love it because again, let's go back to that idea of like, I see somebody downtown and I took advantage of them. And I mean, I know this happens. I've seen it happen with wholesalers where they'll hold people's feet to the fire on a contract where they're buying 100% of market value. Man, I don't want to live in that. The world's, there's too many deals out there for me to live in that idea of I took advantage of somebody. I had a situation like this isn't that same scenario, but I had a situation like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where I bought a house. I bought it at the auction, at the foreclosure sale. So this guy defaulted. He hadn't made his payments for a couple years. The dude would just not respond to me. Like I was trying to get him out without having to do the eviction. And so I had taken this strategy at a certain point that I was going to go and start remodeling the house regardless of whether the person moved out, which is fine as long as you're not going inside the house. So we tear the roof off this house. It's like middle of summer, not we, but like my guys go and they tear the roof off this house and whatever. And I end up going to like a family event and I run into my wife's aunt, who's a lovely person, and she's like, "Hey, did you buy this house at such and such address?" I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Oh, well, that's one of my best friend's brothers. And it was really rude for you to throw your roofing all over their backyard when they have dogs back there and, this kind of thing." And you're like, so I have this, like, you create situations for yourself. And I don't think I was wrong necessarily to do it, but I didn't really want to deal with it at a family reunion.
Of course.
So so I
The
think
best
things come
times.
back to bite us. What if you go to church and you run into that person? You know what I mean? And maybe we're like, well, we don't go to church. Like there's somewhere that you care about that you're going to run into somebody that you've kind of maybe potentially done something wrong to at some point, and you can hold your head high and you can ignore that person if you choose to. But we all know what's right and wrong, and so I think this idea of trying to have this moral compass, and it's really not hard to make a lot of money in real estate by not treating people the wrong way. So if we can treat people the right way and do it, and look, there's a reason that people don't like real estate investors. It's similar to the reason people don't like hard money people, right? It's because they feel that they're going to get screwed. You don't have to screw people to make money in business. You can actually do it the right way. You can treat people the right way, and you can hold your head high, and you can be proud of the work that you've done in your community. And I guess that would be my preference on a lot of those things.
Yeah, I think too, something we encounter often, real estate is an emotional asset. I mean, when you go into a pawn shop and somebody's paying
Mm-hmm.
you 10 cents on the dollar for your diamond ring, there's not the same, maybe with a diamond ring, there comes some emotion with that. But if you're pawning off something and, somebody's paying way less than market value, there's a transactional feel to items and even cars. When it's a
Mm-hmm.
house, you got memories there. You live there every day. There's something about it that carries a different kind of emotional weight. And so you have to treat it like that when you're meeting with
Yeah.
people, and you have to understand that. You can't be tone deaf to
Yeah.
that, because if you
Yeah.
are, you will be ripping people off and you won't last very long, because word will get out that you're the guy that scams everybody, and you might get a few small wins here and there, but you're never going to
Yeah.
build something sustainable, and then your reputation and brand is going to be completely tarnished forever. So you're going to dig yourself a huge hole.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. And I think just carrying that a little bit further, I don't know if you've ever been sued before or sued anybody before, but if you get into those kind of scenarios, you start to
fun.
realize that one transaction wasn't worth it. You can be hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees defending yourself. You can write checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I can thankfully say, like, to date, I haven't had that like happen. I've been on the side where I've been taken advantage of, which is kind of a different story. But I do know the expense. I do know the stress that you can go through. And if we think that we can do things that are wrong or illegal or unethical and that we won't get caught, I would just say it's probably just a matter of time before you get caught.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. And it's such a short-sighted way of doing things. You're never going to take the quick win at somebody else's
Mm-hmm.
expense and build something meaningful or build any meaningful amount of wealth. So
Yeah.
I do want to switch gears and talk about if somebody has a property in the Spokane area, a lot of our listeners are in Idaho as well. What kind of a deal should they look for? What kind of box and parameters of the numbers of the deal do you guys look for?
Well, so it kind of sounds like two questions. So one is like, what should they look for? Two is, what do we look for? So generally speaking, I would just say whatever you're looking at as a buyer or as somebody, as a borrower, I would say make sure you're reasonably to very confident what the end sale price is. Make sure you do your math. And, there's like 1,000 spreadsheets, like Flipper spreadsheets where you can plug in your numbers and you can add in your finance costs and you can add in your repairs and everything like that. When it comes to what you should buy, that's a really tough question for me because I think that basic premise of the idea of you should buy something that you can get in and out of, right? So what you think you can get in and out of or hope you can get in and out of is different from what you can get in and out of. I think of like a house that's halfway burned down and you've never done anything to do with new construction. Do you know you can get in and out of that for your numbers? Maybe you own a construction company, you can put all those numbers on a spreadsheet. But I do think there's that value in knowing, right? I personally have always liked double wide mobile homes on acreage because I think they're just something that people overlook. But you got to make sure that they're newer than 1978, I think it is, in order for that to be conventionally financeable. If I'm looking for deals, I'm just starting today. I'm not looking in the most popular neighborhood. I'm looking in neighborhoods that sell. And so I don't mind the neighborhoods that are maybe just like a little bit more rough and tumble because I can go in, buy a house for less money. It's not as attractive to many real estate investors. And so I don't know what that neighborhood is in Boise. I can think of a few in Spokane where they're just not as exciting because maybe they feel a little more like crimey. There's maybe some bad things that happen in there. So those don't bother me at all. And a lot of times your margins are a little bit better. I'd say if I'm looking for a deal, I'm looking for margin. That's it. And be realistic with your margin. Be realistic with how much it's going to take you to fix that property up. Be realistic with how long it's going to take you. The longer the project takes you, the more it costs you in finance fees. And then when you get into it, think about it. You kind of got a second job here, so like get it done. Our oldest loan on our books is paying off right now, and I think it is from 2017. That is the oldest loan we've ever had. I'm not
Holy
going to tell
moly.
you what the fees have been year over year on that loan, but it's been really ridiculous, and the LTV has stayed really solid for us. So like, I don't want to do that. I don't want a 6 and 7 year old loan on my books, right? So, and it's really expensive, right? Here's the thing: is recognize your daily cost on your project as you're going into it. So if you have $100,000 loan and you've got a 12% interest payment, that's $1,000 a month. What is that a day? So every day you're not getting it done, it's costing you a certain amount of money. You should think about those things. So that's what I would do. And as far as regions or areas, I'm really not preferential to like regions or areas. I do hesitate when you get like way out in the middle of nowhere and you get a town that has, say, 400 residents and you have
No
two
comps.
comps, in the last 2 years, you better just be getting a smoking deal. If you're getting a smoking deal, you're like, hey, this house sold for 2 years ago. The house I'm buying is equal to that. And I'm paying 50% of what that house sold for. Now we're kind of talking, but I'm not super specific on areas or types of properties that I would be looking at. Realize this. So Spokane, we would say like the South Hill, nice part of town, good schools. Not the houses don't sit very long on the South Hill. If you think like your first house should be on the South Hill, what I would say is probably you're just not going to have a good a margin because that's a neighborhood everybody wants. And that means like if every retail buyer wants it, every investor wants it because that's a really popular area. I'm always willing to look on the outskirts of that a little bit. And what are kind of some of the different areas where I think they're still good? As a lender, I think what we look for, we probably talked a lot about, is we're really looking for people that kind of have a little bit of a similar mindset to us and that they're committed to their projects, they're going to get through them, they're going to perform, and that this isn't just kind of a hobby that they're going to kind of be in and out of. And we'll do some of that here and there, but really the idea is that we want to work with people that are professionals. And where we're unique as a hard money lender, and you use us, is we're creative. So I'm an investor. What we can do some different stuff. So I can look at, maybe you have 5 or 6 properties and you don't want to part with a ton of money for a down payment. We can do cross collateral on one of your rental properties or something like that
Right.
because we're not come up with a bunch of cash out of your pocket, right? If you need rehab funds, then we're generally, like I would say 99.9% of the time, we're not going to finance over your purchase price ever. That's just not something that we do. Now, if we look at something like, hey, you got two rentals and you're willing to kind of put those in this loan package, then perhaps we'll kind of consider some of those options. And really what we're looking for is I want to be able to look at it and believe that the person that we're lending money to is going to make money and that they're going to perform, because that creates less stress, it creates less headache. You're probably not going to hate me at the end of that deal because you're going to have made some money. And when you make money, you generally like the people that are around you. When you lose money, then nobody's cool anymore. Kind of another thing I would say is if you're working on a deal and you want someone to work through it with you, and you want to say, what's this going to look like if I borrow money from Inland Capital? You can call Jake or Landon. They'll walk you through it. They'll make it very clear. We don't broker loans. We own our loans. So we have a pool of capital. All the money that we're sending out comes from right here. We own it. We look at everything that we're doing ourselves. Our sales guys are Landon's my brother. He's been with me since 2008. Jake's one of our good friends. We knew him for about 7 years before he came to work for us. There's no like slickness here. We're going to look at your stuff. We're going to have a conversation with you. It's going to be like face to face. It's going to be honest. And then we're going to tell you we need A, B, C, D, E, and F. And if you get us those things, we can tell you exactly what that's going to look like. When you get to closing, the money will be there. We're not changing our fees. None of like, it's just, when we talk about the stress of the deal and we talk about creating scenarios where we like to see people, the best way we can do that is by being really honest with you. And then the other thing is we're not going to evaluate your deal from the standpoint of, I would buy this deal, I wouldn't buy this deal. But we are going to evaluate. If you ask us a question, we'll probably give you some perspective. And Landon and I have bought and sold a ton of properties together. So I think there's a little bit of value for the borrower side in knowing that you're not just dealing with somebody who's trying to bang out one more loan for one more commission. We actually are looking at this kind of as a long-term thing. We want more clients that we can say, that guy's been a client. In 10 years from now, we can say, that guy's been our client for 10 years. That's what we love.
Right on. I
Does
love
that answer your question?
It totally does. I think that speaks to your guys' commitment to a long-term business relationship, right? You're not trying to maximize the amount of money that you make on any one given deal. You're in it for the next 100 deals and there to create that win-win. So my last question for you today, if somebody is looking to get into lending, what is step one? What should they do?
Man, that's an interesting question. One is, I would say you should know real estate. I think there's kind of a lot of different options as far as what you want to do. I don't know if this makes sense, but like a lot of times I like to answer what you should not do. Okay, so let's identify what we should not do. We should not take people's money, other parties' money, and put that to work if we don't have any skin in the game. That's one thing that we should not do. Two, we should not make commitments to our investors or our borrowers that we do not know with 99.9% certainty that we can meet. So if you're promising an investor a return, and you darn well better make that return. If you're promising a borrower that you can close by February 15th, you darn well better be able to close by February 15th. And if you don't have the money in the bank, you can't make the promise. So that would mean, like, I'm pretty sure I can get this guy's money and I'm pretty sure this is a good deal. You don't commit to that borrower, because if you leave that borrower high and dry at the table, it's over. And he's going to call me, by the way, and I'm going to make sure that I get that deal done in the right time frame. Let's see, what else you don't do. You don't look at the deal purely based on LTV. You also have to look at the performance of the borrower, because if you start putting money out there, let's say you do gather some money from investors, you kind of gain a little momentum, and then you're like, ooh, I'd really like to own this property, and you do that loan and you don't get payments coming in off of it. You can only handle so many people not paying you before the ship starts to go the other direction and your investors start to question things and they start to get really disappointed with you. Let's see, what else would I would not lend on properties that I wasn't comfortable owning. I wouldn't lend. So, if you've never owned a mobile home park, don't do a mobile home park loan. It's one of those where, sure enough, it'll be the one deal that you end up foreclosing on and you're like, I had no idea that we had to have water tests done twice a month, and we don't own any of these units and all these kind of things. If you don't know how to underwrite that deal as a purchaser, you don't know how to underwrite that deal as a lender. So you have to figure out how that underwriting works. And it's just better to be more conservative if you're lending money. So we don't require appraisals because we have access to comps in all these different markets and we have real estate brokers. But let's just say you're from Boise and you're thinking about starting some lending and then you get a call from a guy in Seattle. If you don't know that market, I'd stay out of that market. And I'm not saying stay out of it because I care, because I'm not super worried about you competing with me. I'm saying if you can't like drive there in a reasonable amount of time and you can't deal with that property, I've got an REO in Seattle that's a motel that I've been dealing with since 2021. Okay.
Nice.
And we're tearing the motel down because the damage has been so bad by the vagrants. Okay. I'm from Seattle. I know that area, right? And this was just a weird deal. And it happened to be some insurance fraud in the middle of it. So it's just kind of this strange stuff. But if you don't know the type of product that you're investing in, then don't do it. If your borrower doesn't have skin in the game, you shouldn't be lending any money, right? Let's just say it's like 40% of market value. You got a borrower that has $0, but he needs you to front the full purchase price and the rehab. I wouldn't do that deal. The reason is he's only looking at the upside of that deal, and you're only looking at that upside of that deal. But what does he have to lose if that deal goes sideways? He doesn't lose any money because he has no money in the deal, right? So, like, those are just kind of some basics. And I would just say, there's one thing I think we see both in lending and in real estate is we see people that they come in really hot and heavy and they try to go as fast as they possibly can. And what I would say is, I'm not worried about being the biggest. I develop real estate. I'm not the biggest real estate developer. I lend money. I'm not the biggest lender. I play golf. So this would be like my goal in golf is to beat myself. You could
Yeah.
be like a 0 handicap. I'm a 7 handicap. I'm not going to go out there and beat you. Okay. So, like, realize what your handicap is when you go out there and try to play to your handicap. Don't try to beat the biggest and the best players out there. And I understand people are in a hurry to make a lot of money. Sometimes I'm not in a hurry to make a lot. I want to be sustainable. I just want to be able to build year over year. And I think that the guys who come in really hot and heavy, they raise a bunch of money, they buy a bunch of real estate, or they start lending money, and they haven't experienced any of the problems that time presents. And then if you're not careful, you'll experience a lot of them all at once. And if you experience them all at once, it's harder to stay in business.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Well, Aaron, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all your experience in wealth. I wish we had more time. I have a lot of other questions to ask you, but we might have to have you back on in the
I'll be
future
around.
here. Perfect. Where can people that have a deal or want to get it
Sure.
funded and underwritten by you guys, where do they go?
Yeah, so the inland cap.com. Go on there. There's like a really easy loan app, or we have the numbers for Landon or Jake on there. Both those guys are pretty great, and they'd be happy to kind of walk you through it. But or you can email Landon at inlandcap.com or Jake at inlandcap.com.
Perfect. Hit these guys up. I've worked with them on multiple deals, and they're by far the easiest lender that I've worked with so far, and really fast. If you got a fast deal, especially, they can get it done, no questions asked. So thanks a bunch, Aaron. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.